Amount of time, even as the exam containers are being opened in various places. Earlier on, we just saw the PS of Education, Dr. Julius Juang, in the Kibera DC grounds officiating the opening of containers. Remember, the candidates are set to start today with the English paper, take a break over the weekend, and then continue with the mathematics paper as of Monday, with the chemistry paper as well. We'll definitely continue highlighting the state of preparedness across the county, even as KCSE kicks off its day one of that particular examination. Do stay right here on KTN News for more updates on that. But before I interrupted Mark Bichachi, he was just giving us his take on the exam preparedness in the country. And just earlier on, we had spoken about perhaps the multi-agency approach, where police officers are also at the examination centers, perhaps playing one role or the other in terms of overseeing the security of this particular examination. Talk to us about it, because Professor was just sharing with me right now of how many uniformed police officers we saw in those number of links we've just done with our reporters right now. But even as you talk to us about that, kindly bring a little bit of input on the capitation balance, because not every school seems to have gotten the full amount, with the Basic Education Principal Secretary saying the capitation balance that is remaining will be sent to schools next month, and this might affect the preparation of practical examinations as well.
Well, Jesse, as I was saying before, we must be very careful as to what we consider normal as a country. It cannot be that it is normal for a country in 2021 to have guns protecting an exam where people who are generally under 18 are the ones who are examined. There's something very wrong with our society, and Professor has talked about that. But there's also a bit of backwardness, and I know people have argued that the same thing happens in China and therefore we should not change. I do not think we are in the space where we should be putting all our kids to sit one examination, which unfortunately, if you wake up that day and you have malaria, you're going to fail and you'll have to repeat, despite the fact that you've performed very well from class 1 to class 7 or from 1 to form 3. So we need to look at a continuous assessment. We need to look at nurturing talents. We need to look at expanding our education. That is where I stand. Now, of course, if I was going to judge what the ministry has done in terms of what is normal and what usually happens, I think the ministry has done what is expected of them. I've not seen anything spectacular to talk about. But beyond that, there's also the fact that Kenya had a very huge chunk of our taxes taken away when we were paying 14% VAT, when payee was reduced. So definitely there's going to be delays in the receiving of cash, both in education and in parastatals, and different ministries are suffering the same fate. But there's good news on the horizon. As you all remember, earlier this year, the KRA said that it had met its target for January. We're waiting to hear whether they met the target in February. And if that continues, then Kenya is on the mend. So I expect that every person who is expecting government services or government payments in any sense should expect delays. And that does not indicate failure, as Ndi would put it. It indicates that we did a very simple thing. We gave Kenyans a break, and when you reduce the amount of tax, you're definitely going to receive less money. That is not a crisis if you planned for it.
Okay, PMG Njuguna, your take on the ongoing examinations, KCSE Day 1, even as perhaps we highlight that unfortunate story on the Daily Nation in terms of next attention to detail in preparing examinations, where the English language paper had actually been lifted from a best-selling book. At least 2 questions.
I cannot agree more with my fellow presenters. What are we really measuring? You have taken children to classrooms, you have guarded them with helicopters, you have guarded them with guns. What are you measuring? What is the use and purpose of education? You are simply, education properly defined is a process of intellectual growth, is a process of mental growth, is a process of also of emotional growth. This child has grown from class 1, class 8, now he's in Form 4, is intended to enter the university. What is the intellectual growth? What is the technical growth? What have you measured? What is the talent that have been developed? How can you do that in a day? That is why continuous assessment tests are absolutely necessary. To measure intelligence of a person, it is mental growth over chronological age times 100. It is a measurement at what level can a child think. If a child is 10 years, the intelligence, what is his level of intelligence? Is thinking like what age? How would these papers measure that intelligence?
All right.
I will tell you it is not possible. So many people intelligent, so many people that can manage university education, so many people that can manage technical education will fail. Because the process of testing their intellectual capacity and intellectual growth cannot be done in front of guards. It is like you watch a child, even without the child knowing you are assessing the child, you estimate the capacity of that particular child. You assess the capacity of that young man. There are so many things that we hear from the villages that would tell you that child has got over and above the intellectual capacity that is required.
Okay.
Yet, from a very deep rural areas, I am saying that education has lost meaning. What the government and the level of preparedness, the preparedness is to misconceive. The current preparedness, I cannot have shame by saying, you are trying to make the examination, intellectual growth, intellectual development a mystery. It is not representative of a people. That's why you have got members of parliament with fake certificates, with fake degrees. That's why they were floated everywhere. Even as we talk, we know members of parliament that the Kenya National Examination Council have declared their certificate fake. They're still in parliament. Because we have always assumed that a certificate is a representative of 14 years or of so many years of intellectual growth.
Okay.
A certain capacity, a certain method has to be created, and it is there. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a needs assessment, the level of growth from this stage to that stage. Now, where are the teenagers now that are being assessed today? What is their needs? What are their targets? What are their talents that can be measured at this time? Have there been a process of making sure that what they have intellectually, what they have talent, have been developed? That is what I would call education. All right. And that's why we have failed as a country for so long. We cannot now, you make the whole country, mobilize the whole security. There cannot be nothing more important now than that paper.
All right, PMG. So I think that definitely emphasis needs to be put on continuous assessment. Professor, I'll give you your last take on this. It's not all gloom. We have the CBC being implemented as we speak. Of course, a lot of emphasis has to go into the implementation process, but it's what we're talking about, the continuous assessment and the lack of too much emphasis on these examinations, KCPE and KCSE, as has been the norm. What's your take on this?
First, having members of parliament with proven fake certificates is not an indication of a bad education system. It's an indication of failure in our institutions to enforce the law, because the laws are there protect us against those fake certificates, those cheats. I think the examinations, we can't really condemn that process also. The examinations, they test something. They test that the student has absorbed the material. They test that the student has grown, but more important, they test the child's ability to make a decision. Sometimes some questions are set to see that whether you can actually make a rational decision. So examination as always is not bad. But we are moving to that continuous assessment because we are moving to CBC, the competency-based education. If it's invested well, if we put our resources in it, both the human capital and the physical resources, then we are likely to disintegrate, like the PMG is saying, to those people with the special talents and those people with academic talent and so on. Because the trouble, and I can understand my panelists, their concern, is our system as it is now assumes everybody wants to be an academic, which is not accurate.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely continue monitoring the state of the examinations. KCSE Day 1 is actually today. We've just monitored the opening of examination containers earlier on, even as preparation is rife across the counties. To keep it right here on KTN News, we'll bring you up to speed, even as we highlight some of the measures taken in order to keep the students safe due to the ongoing pandemic, even as we try and safeguard the integrity of the KCSE examination.